a nun lost on the prairie, and a marriage of survival that changed everything. Stay with me, and you'll hear how God turned hardship into a love worth keeping. So if you'd like to hear more heartfelt Wild West tales like this one, make sure to subscribe so I can share them with you every day. And if you're ready to ride into this story with me, give this video a like and drop the number 1 in the comments so I'll know you're in the saddle ready for the journey. Now, let's step onto the wide prairie together where the wind carries both prayer and promise, and meet the young nun whose life would change forever. Some lives are shaped by the wide prairie sky, others by the toll of a chapel bell. Sister Agnes had always belonged to the latter until the day the bell fell silent. For 25 years, the world beyond the convent stone walls had been little more than rumor to her. Dawn meant the thin gold light spilling across the chapel floor, warming the bare boards beneath her knees. Midday meant the clink of tin spoons in the refectory, the laughter of younger novices carrying laundry to the line. Evening meant lavender blooms along the garden path she had planted her first year, their scent rising with the vesper prayers. She had known hunger now and again, but never fear. The fire came without warning. It began as a thin curl of smoke from the west dormitory, no more alarming than the steam from the kitchen stove. But the wind shifted, and in a heartbeat, the dry shingles roared to life. Bells clanged, not for prayer, but for flight. The air turned black and hot thick with sparks that stung like hornets. Someone screamed her name. Another voice shouted for buckets. Agnes stumbled through the chaos, clutching the wooden cross at her breast, coughing on the bitter smoke. By nightfall, the convent was nothing but charred beams and ash. Half the sisters were unaccounted for. Of those who survived, most had family to take them in. Agnes did not. She had entered the order at 14, a foundling with no name but the one the church had given her. And now, for the first time in her life, she was truly alone. The days that followed blurred into a wandering she could scarcely remember. She walked until her shoes split, until her lips cracked in the wind. The plains rolled on forever dun-colored grass, bending to an indifferent sky, the horizon always retreating as she approached. She prayed as she went, prayers that grew shorter and more urgent. Lord, guide my steps. Lord, spare me this thirst. Lord, keep my heart steady. On the 4th day, hunger drove her to her knees. The sun was a white coin overhead, and every breath felt like drawing air through cloth. She thought she saw a pool of water ahead ringed with cottonwoods, but when she stumbled closer, the image wavered and vanished. Her hands trembled. She sank to the dry earth, whispering the first words of the Hail Mary, unsure if she would ever finish them. That was when the shadow fell across her. At first, she thought it was another mirage, a towering figure blotting the sun, broad as a barn door, with shoulders that seemed carved from stone. But then a voice deep and unhurried broke through the ringing in her ears. Easy now. A hand, calloused warm, slipped under her arm, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. The man smelled faintly of horse and wood smoke. His face was hidden beneath the brim of a sweat-darkened hat, but she caught the glint of pale eyes, studying her, not with suspicion, but with concern. "Name's Ephraim Cutter," he said. "You're about to drop where you stand." Agnes tried to answer, but her voice was no more than a rasp. He crouched, slid one arm beneath her knees, and in a single smooth motion gathered her against his chest. She felt the steady thump of his heart through the coarse fabric of his shirt. They crossed the prairie together, she in his arms, he striding without hurry but without pause, until the low outline of a ranch house rose from the grasslands. By the time he set her down before a small porch, the world was tilting in her vision. She caught the creak of the screen door, the smell of bread, and something savory before darkness claimed her. The last thought she carried into that darkness was a bewildered one. Why would the Lord send a giant to rescue me? If this moment already has you wondering what she'll decide, give this video a like so I know you're riding along with the story. When Agnes woke, the first thing she noticed was the smell of fresh bread cooling on a nearby table and the faint, clean scent of soap. The second was the quiet. After the roar of fire and the lonely howl of the prairie wind, the silence felt almost like a blessing. She was in a narrow bed covered by a quilt pieced in faded blues. Through the window, late sunlight spilled across a yard fenced in split rails, and beyond that, open pasture rolled away toward the horizon. "You're awake." She turned. Ephraim Cutter stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, as if entering a church. Up close, he seemed even larger, but there was no threat in him, only a deliberate stillness, the kind a man learns from years of watching the weather more than people. "You fainted out there," he said. "I gave you water, got some food in you while you slept. There's more waiting when you're ready." Over the next 2 days, she learned the rhythms of his house. He rose before dawn, moving with quiet efficiency, tending to the horses, checking the fence line, splitting wood. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice was steady, like the low hum of a hymn. And he never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. On the third evening after supper, he lingered at the table instead of rising to his chores. He folded his hands, as if measuring his words before speaking. "Sister." He hesitated, searching her face. "You can't stay out here alone. Folks'll notice you, and some of 'em won't have good intentions. This land can be unkind to a woman on her own." "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted. "That's why I'm asking." His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. "Marry me, in name only. I'll give you a roof, food, a safe place to pray. I won't ask for more than your company, and you'll have my word on that." Her breath caught. Marriage was not a path she'd ever pictured, not for someone who had given her life to God. The cross at her neck felt heavy, almost accusing. That night, she knelt by the bed, the quilt cool beneath her folded hands. The question turned in her mind until it became prayer. Perhaps she thought the Lord sometimes sent shelter in the shape of a man's shadow. By dawn, her answer was ready. What would you have done in her place? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts on these crossroads. By the time the sun rose on that third morning, the decision had been made. It was not romance she agreed to, nor comfort, nor even companionship in the way most would understand it. It was survival, but also something deeper she could not yet name. The wedding was as plain as the promise behind it. 2 witnesses from the nearest ranch, a traveling preacher whose boots were still dusty from the trail, and the low murmur of vows spoken in the drafty church at Miller's Crossing. Ephraim's "I do" was steady without flourish, as if he were staking a claim on land he meant to keep safe forever. Agnes's own words trembled, but they held. He brought her home that afternoon. Home, she tested the word in her mind as they crossed the wide pasture to the weathered ranch house. Inside, he had cleared a small room for her at the back with a window that faced east, so she could greet the morning light. Within an hour, she had set a crucifix on the wall and smoothed a folded shawl over the chair beside the bed. The room felt bare, but not empty. Their days took on a rhythm. Ephraim rose early, leaving the scent of wood smoke and leather in the air. Agnes prepared coffee and bread before turning to her own work, mending shirts, sweeping the porch, tending a small garden she began behind the kitchen. They spoke little in those first weeks, but there was a courtesy in his silence, as though he understood that trust grew best without being forced. Now and then, she would find traces of his quiet care. One afternoon, after remarking that the kitchen chair wobbled, she returned to find it repaired and sanded smooth. Another morning, she opened the door to a single stem of prairie bluebell, resting in a cup of water. She never saw him place it there, but she knew. He in turn began to watch her. In small moments, her head bent over a book of psalms, the soft way she hummed a hymn while kneading dough, the calm she carried into a house that had been silent for too many years. She did not fill the air with chatter, but she filled the space nonetheless. On Sundays, they rode into town together, Ephraim leading the way on his bay gelding Agnes, following on a gentle mare he had saddled just for her. Folks looked twice when they passed the giant rancher and the young nun, who wore no veil, now only a plain dress and the cross at her neck. There were questions in those glances, but no one asked aloud. As spring deepened, the land softened under their care. Fences were mended, the garden sprouted green, and a strange peace settled over the place. It was not yet love, at least not the kind either dared to name, but But something had taken root between them, quiet and sure as the prairie grass. And like all things on the prairie, it would be tested. If you want to know how this peaceful prairie turns into a battleground, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming. Peace on the prairie never lasts forever. Sometimes the wind shifts before you can smell the rain. It was a bright afternoon in late May when Ephraim spotted the rider, a black speck cresting the ridge to the south, growing larger with each steady beat of hooves. He didn't say a word, but Agnes saw the change in him. The easy line of his shoulders stiffened, and his eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. The man who dismounted at their gate wore a fine coat far too warm for the day and carried himself with the casual arrogance of someone who expected the world to step aside. Jonathan Blackwood. The name came with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Cutter," he drawled, removing his gloves one finger at a time. "I believe you and I have business." Ephraim said nothing, only waited. Blackwood produced a folded paper from his coat. "Debt owed. Your father's hand on the signature. Interest unpaid these many years. I'm here to collect." Agnes, standing just inside the porch rail, felt the first stirrings of unease. She'd heard enough talk in town to know Blackwood's reputation land disputes that always ended in his favor debts that seemed to appear from thin air. "My father's been dead 15 years, Ephraim said at last. Blackwood's smile widened, thin and sharp. "Then I reckon it's time the son settled what the father could not." When the rider was gone, leaving only the dust of his passing, Ephraim folded the paper once and slid it into his pocket. "I'll deal with it," he said. But there was a weight in his voice that told her he meant to carry it alone. That night, Agnes lay awake listening to the wind against the shutters. She thought of the man who had carried her out of the heat and dust, the one who had given her a roof without asking for her soul in return. And she knew she could not let him stand alone against this. By morning, she was ready. Over coffee, she set her cup down and looked across the table. "Ephraim, if this man is lying, there will be others who know. We need to go into town. Speak to the pastor, the clerk, the folks who remember your father. If you'll stand, I'll stand with you." He studied her a long moment, as though measuring the steel beneath her quiet voice. Then slowly he nodded. The storm had found them, and together they would meet it head-on. What do you think will happen when they face Blackwood? Give this video a like and share your guess in the comments. I'll be watching to see who gets it right. Some battles aren't fought with guns or fists, but with truth and the courage to speak it aloud. The next morning, Ephraim hitched the wagon, while Agnes packed a basket with bread, cheese, and a jar of preserves. The air was crisp, the sky a clear and endless blue. But she could feel the weight of what lay ahead, pressing on both of them. They rode into town side by side. In Miller's Crossing, heads turned as they passed the giant rancher, jaw set like stone, and the young woman beside him, whose cross caught the sunlight at every turn. Blackwood's name was already on everyone's lips. His kind always moved faster than decency. Their first stop was the church. Pastor Green, a wiry man with sharp eyes, listened as Agnes explained the claim against Ephraim. "Your father never owed Jonathan Blackwood a dime," the pastor said flatly. "That man's been trying to get your land for years. He's just found a new lie to peddle." From there, they went to the clerk's office. Agnes stood beside Ephraim as the clerk unrolled brittle ledgers, each page smelling faintly of ink and dust. Her hands itched to touch the pages herself, but she kept them folded before her, letting the man's record speak. Line by line, the truth emerged. The debt was a forgery. By midday, the pair had visited every storekeeper and old-timer who remembered Ephraim's father. In each place, Agnes spoke plainly, her voice steady, her words carrying the quiet authority of someone who had nothing to gain but justice. She saw the shift in the townsfolk's faces, first curiosity, then recognition, and finally resolve. When they returned home, the sun was sinking behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Ephraim set the brake on the wagon, but didn't climb down right away. He sat for a moment, staring out across the pasture, the lines of tension easing from his face. "You didn't have to do all that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," she answered. "You saved me when I had nothing. It's my turn to stand for you." Something passed between them then, not the spark of sudden passion, but the deep warmth of trust forged in hardship. She felt it in the way his eyes lingered on hers and in the quiet that followed, comfortable and sure. The storm had broken, but something else had taken its place. The certainty that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. If this journey has touched your heart, follow this channel so we can ride together through more tales like this one. Some choices change the course of a life. Others change the shape of the soul. In the quiet that followed the storm, the ranch seemed different, not in the land itself, but in the air between them. The debt was gone. Blackwood's scheme undone, and yet Agnes felt the true victory was something deeper, the unspoken bond forged in the fight. One evening, as the first stars appeared over the darkening prairie, she found Ephraim on the porch leaning against the rail. The lantern light caught the strong lines of his face softened now by something like wonder. "I need to tell you the truth," she began, her voice barely above the night wind. "I've tried to keep my heart still, but it hasn't listened. I've come to love you. And yet, I vowed my life to God. I don't know if I can break that vow." He turned to her then, slow and deliberate, his eyes steady. "Agnes, maybe you're not breaking it at all. Maybe God meant for your light to be here, in this house with me. To raise children who know kindness, to make this land a place of peace. That sounds like his work to me." Tears blurred her vision, but they felt like a release. She stepped closer, and he took her hand, rough palm warm against her fingers. "Then I will stay," she whispered, "not just as your wife in name, but in truth." Years later, the house rang with children's laughter. Agnes knelt beside a small bed, guiding tiny hands in evening prayer, while Ephraim stood in the doorway, smiling at the life they had built. Her old vow had not been broken, it had been transformed. This story reminds us that God's plans often unfold in ways we do not expect. True love and steadfast faith are not rivals, but companions on the same path toward grace. Through hardship, sacrifice, and trust, we see that service to God can be lived not only within sacred walls, but also in the humble work of building a home, raising the young, and protecting the innocent. Love itself can be a holy vow, blessed by the Lord's own hand. If this story warmed your heart, make sure to subscribe, so we can share many more journeys like this together. And when you're ready, ride with me into the next tale. It's waiting for you just ahead.